I'm down here on Wacker Drive by Trump Tower, and all the river tours are about to kick off. I would assume that they're already going. And the funny thing is, with the river tours, they can stop at buildings and you can exit and then go in for a tour of the building. Like, why wouldn't they offer a daily tour at Trump Towers? Truly, a tour of the building at Trump Towers. They would take you to certain places inside Trump Towers and then show you, there's open rooms, truly, where there's suites and that people might own and that they're out and they're available and they could come in for a tour. And yes, you want to make sure people don't take things, but again, they can come in for a tour and they can see how the suites are in Trump Towers. And then they can go up to the restaurant and then go out on the deck and so on. And that can be part of the tour with the architectural water tour. And you can stop and pick which buildings you would like to take a tour through the building. And it can give you the history. This is the former Chicago Sun-Times property, and it was the former Chicago Sun-Times. The Times was across the street from the Tribune. Yeah, the Chicago Sun-Times and the Chicago Tribune were right across the street from each other. That's how Roger Ebert and Gene Siskel ended up getting to know each other. They worked right across the street from each other and used to talk and collaborate. The film critic from the Times, who wrote his own pieces for the Times, worked with the film critic from the Chicago Tribune, who wrote his own pieces for the Chicago Tribune. They both wrote their own film reviews for the papers independently. And then they had a show they did together that was independent from the paper, that was their own show, Siskel and Ebert, on film. And they didn't mention the Tribune and they didn't mention the Chicago Sun-Times at all. It was the Siskel and Ebert show. But people knew if you wanted to get more of the reviews, you could pick up the Sun-Times and pick up the Tribune and you would get their independent opinion. But if you wanted to get the joint opinion, you had to watch the TV show. The TV show, they gave you the joint opinion, but if you wanted more in-depth of their individual opinions, so the papers were good with it because it promoted the sale of both of their papers. And so the show was really popular, and even not mentioning the Tribune or Sun-Times, everybody knew that Roger Ebert worked for the Tribune and Gene Siskel worked for the Sun-Times. And so by default, it promoted the papers. So they allowed them to do it. Oh yeah, they had to approve it, but they allowed them to approve it because it was indirectly promoting the papers. And more people were picking up the papers to read the film reviews. And in there, they did more than just film reviews. They did, I think, theatrical reviews and other types of reviews. So again, the show was very limited, but the show you could have the same Siskel and Ebert, but it could have been just on reviewing Broadway. So the Broadway plays here, but the thing is, there's not enough of them. They don't change over like movies, so you couldn't have it from week to week. Where movies, there are always new movies opening, and that keeps them in business, or at least re-releases, and then you have TV shows and other things. So Dean, who works for WGN and the Tribune, I would assume he's the Chicago Tribune's film critic, and he works for WGN, and he's writing for the paper. He reviews more than just films. He reviews TV shows, films, he does theatrical, and he also does music. He reviews musical acts as well. And then he does comedians and so on. So he has a pretty broad base of entertainment, and that means he could write that for the Chicago Tribune and write in the Chicago Magazine more extensively. So the Tribune only has so much room for him daily, but he could have several pages in the Chicago Magazine, which is published by the Chicago Tribune. So, again, I'm down here and I'm wondering what Chicago is doing to enhance the Riverwalk experience. Truly. So when you get off the architectural tour, you go back for certain building tours. And that means when you come back to Chicago, you might have stopped at one of these buildings, but the next time you come back to take a tour of Tribune Tower or take a tour of the Gleacher Center. And it can go up and it has all the Nobel Prize on the one floor, and it talks about the history of the University of Chicago. And they can have daily tours, at least on the weekends. And it's for people that just want to understand the University of Chicago. They're in Chicago, and it can be part of the architectural tour. So they can mention them on the architectural tour. The Gleacher Center is down here, and it's the University of Chicago, and it has the Graham School and the Booth School, and it has other graduate courses, but it's basically the Graham and Booth School. And they talk about the Gleacher Center. And then all these different buildings, people come back and they can take tours. You can take a tour of the Hyatt Hotel, and they can show you some of the rooms. I did this with Jen. Remember I told you with the Kenzie Street Hotel, it just opened. And I talked to the guy, and I dropped off some bags, and I said, you know, my girlfriend is very big into hotels. So am I, but she likes knowing the beds and everything. And so I said, hey, can you give us a tour? And so he took us through the hotel, and he took us into one of the available rooms. And he said, we have this type of room and that type of room, and here are the beds, and, you know, these are the products we use. We have these products, you know, these are our shampoos, these are our soaps that we use in the hotel, and then we have this lounge area and so on. I did this when I went to New York. There's a hotel I told you about that's in New York that's all about fitness. And so in the room, it has a yoga mat, and it has exercise ball, and on the video, on the TV, it has different exercise videos. So in the room, it has different yoga equipment for you to do stretching and do different exercises. And all you have to do is turn on the TV set, and you can do fitness training in your room. It was the first hotel that integrated fitness, and I was staying at the hotel. I actually finished up my tax return and submitted it that day as well in the lounge area in that hotel. But it was nice. And that was when I first got introduced to CPA Plus Network. So, anyways, you're down here and you have this building, like taking a tour of the Sheraton Hotel. And then there's the Swiss Hotel and the Palm Hotel. So, or the Swiss Palm Hotel. And there's the Wid Hotel and so on. But they can have their own tours where people can just check it out because maybe one day they want to stay there. So these are nice hotels, and it's a way to integrate them into the architectural tour. And they can talk about how they were built, what was the design, what were the rooms, what was the motif of the hotel, and how the rooms were designed, and how the rooms from the Swiss Hotel differ from the rooms at the Sheraton, or, you know, or right here, the St. Regis Hotel, and how they differ. So you have the St. Regis Hotel right here, and how the rooms differ in this hotel. Whoops, they close off the entranceway, so I'm not going to make the loop. But again, how they differ. So again, they can do this as part of the tour. And they can talk about the residential buildings. They don't talk about the residential. And these are the residential buildings, and these were designed by blank architect, and these are rental properties, these are condominiums, these are timeshare, and so on. And, you know, giving them a little bit more understanding of, you know, the living arrangements in the city and how they were designed and what the motif was behind the designs and so on. But that's all part of Chicago. So you have the Hyatt Regency. And so you have this, and this is all uniquely part, and I'm wondering, are they going to do more with the shoreline tours and that and integrate it to other types of tours? Like, how about a tour of the Art Museum, the Chicago Institute of Art? And how about a tour of the Field Museum, meaning a guided tour, and they just take you through, and you can go back and look at the exhibits more in detail, but they take you through the whole museum to give you an understanding. And the best thing is to take the tour of the museum, and they go by and they say, I think it was the Science and Industry had the coal mine in it, or was it the Field Museum? And I forget who had the submarine. The World War II German sub. It was sitting in Lake Michigan. And I walked on a German submarine. I actually been on a World War II submarine internally. It was here in Chicago. And so it was cool. I walked on a U-boat, a German U-boat. So, again, that they had to bring it up here, but it was functional. So somebody brought the U-boat here. So anyways, so going through, and you go through the museum, and you get it like going down here to the Chicago Theater District, and you take a tour, and you can go in. It's open for the tours, and the tours can go in, and then they talk about how it's designed, the Cadillac Palace, and how they designed the seating and the stage, and then they can maybe go behind stage, but a tour of the theater district, and you can get a feel for how they're doing and so on. But this is for your understanding edification. It's not for you to rip off their product, and they make you sign a thing that you're not going to steal intellectual properties, that you're down here because of your personal curiosity. I took the big bus tour and all these tours, and it was just for edification. It was nice to have some understanding and so on. I wasn't looking to get into the big bus tour, per se. But they can sign that form that basically that says they're not going to, steal these intellectual properties. And this is for entertainment. This is not a business deal. This is for personal enjoyment and entertainment. How about taking a tour of the Harold Washington Library? The city of Chicago putting on tours of City Hall. Yeah, tour of City Hall. And they take you up to the mayor's office. And there's tours. The White House has tours all the time. I was supposed to go on the tour of the White House, but it got canceled. So again, running these through and making sure that people get the right screening and background check, and that's the point of the visa system and everything. And so they do all the protocols and all the checks and that, and you get to go on the grounds of the White House, and you get to see part of the White House through the tour. And so it's a good thing. You can see the building and the infrastructure in that. Now is everybody a thief? And everybody's trying to steal intellectual properties? And so you have it, and this is where the United Nations, it can sanction any of its member states. And you can complain to the United Nations, and you have the voucher, and you have the person's name, and you have their ID and everything. So you have all that information. And so, again, there's ways to protect yourself, and these are supposed to be for, take a tour of the Chicago subway system. Truly, a tour of the Chicago subway system. And they go under and they talk about this station was built here, and then it goes up to the elevated line. And they talk about the loop around the downtown, and they built this stop for this reason and that stop for this reason, and it gets off here and there. And then the stop under, I think, the merchandise mark. Not the merchandise mark. Yes, there's a stop at the merchandise mark, but the stop at the CME group too. So again, you're getting off and they're telling why the stop was built and the history of the Chicago subway system, the history of the Chicago elevated line. You can even take a tour of the Metro. And you cruise out to the burbs and you cruise back to the city. And then they tell you as you're going by that you're going by this area, and they inform you. But the people that are on that train is an architectural, and they're taking you through and talking about the suburbs and the different stations and a little history of the different towns. So the Metro can be a tour as well. And so you get that, and then there's, tour books you can buy. Truly, tour books that have pictures and so on. And they have, pictures and autographs from the architect that designed the building. And it talks about the Chicago construction company. James McHugh was, the architecture was Robert Downey Jr. I'm just using that as a name. And it was built by James McHugh Construction. And so on. And it has a little bit about McHugh Construction. And truly, the construction company, the architect. And a little bit about, the building products, like this building was mostly built with concrete, and this building was steel, and so on. And you're just giving an overview of how the building was made. You're not going into intimate detail of the design, but you're giving them an idea. This is the largest concrete structure, which I don't know if the Trade Center here in Chicago, the Merchandise Mart, is it the world's largest concrete structure still? I don't know. It was at one time, the world's largest concrete building. So, again, understanding this. And then Central Station, what it was and what it is today. And then how did Museum Park form? And then you can get the tour and go into Soldier Field. It's part of all Museum Park. And so you're doing a tour that you're going into a little bit into the Field Museum, a little bit into the planetarium, a little bit into the Shed Aquarium, out to Northerly Island, and then into Soldier Field, and then out of Soldier Field, and that's the tour. But the tour is of Museum Park itself. And so you get an idea for it. Or like here, you can do a tour of the parks, like Grant Park and why it was built, and the other segment, and these statues of people walking and when they were put in, and the history of the different statues in the different parks, and when was Grant Park, Montgomery Ward, and so on. The Friends of the Park was formed by, I think, Montgomery Ward. And there's a guy on WTDW. He does long tours. But, again, he can do those things as actual tours. Not only just a video, but you can actually ride the tour. And he's there, and he's guiding the tour himself. You can watch the video, but you can actually physically go on the tour. I would like to go on the tour from the videos I saw, to actually go on the tour with him and take the tour and really live it. I see it on there, and then I could really live it. Or how about the tour of where movies were shot in Chicago? Like here on Wacker Drive, they shot Batman Returns, or they shot the Transformers, which they did do the Transformers and Batman in Chicago. And they talk about the history. Or the Google Center, but I think the Thompson Center was the Babysitter. There's a Babysitter movie. And again, the Babysitter movie. So I forget what it was, but I liked it. And they were out on that roof that's on a big angle. And again, they can go through this history, or a tour of the places where John Hughes truly films were shot. And it's on the North Shore, and it's a bus trip, but they take you to Ferris Bueller, and here's the entrance at the, New Trier High School, and then over here's Risky Business, and here's the Porsche dealership in the downtown area that was in Risky Business, and then here's the area where Pretty in Pink was. And so you have a tour on the North Shore. So the North Shore can have the same thing. And you can have tours telling a history of the museum and that. You might have to link them up like Highland